Chapter 61, Chapter 53. And just where did you end up last night? Draco drawled as Eliza sneaked back into the common room the next day. He was sprawled out on the sofa, a cup of tea on the table, piles of books around him, and a few empty phials of pepper-up potion. The picture of a man who had just pulled an all-nighter for a last-minute transfiguration essay. I stayed over at Tom's. Eliza replied, promptly ignoring Draco's salacious look as he shot up from his spot. Nothing happened before you start. Nothing. He echoed somewhat disappointedly, and Eliza truly couldn't pass up on such a perfect opportunity. Well, I met death, and officially became its master, but other than that, I'm sorry what? Eliza waved a blasé hand, shrugging her shoulders. It's not that important. I'll tell you all later. I'm Draco spluttered, and Eliza valiantly smothered her laughter. Hey, don't you dare walk away from me, young lady. Despite his protests, Eliza did in fact continue to walk away from him. She was still quite tired after last night. She'd have a nap now and use the time turner to attend her skipped lessons, and everyone would be none the wiser. She might even try and fit in a visit to Jormy. That would be nice. It was not nice. You and Master have finally made a home nest, Jormy said with false wisdom the second Eliza arrived to visit the old basilisk. Eliza spluttered, not liking the implications of that at all, and rounded on Jormy, demanding an explanation. You smell of Master. Is there not a home nest? The basilisk questioned, evidently confused, and Eliza slumped against his giant head. Jormy, evidently not understanding that her despair stemmed from his blatant confusion, attempted to comfort her, bringing his tail round to wrap her in a sort of basilisk cocoon. No, there is no home nest, Jormy. Eliza hissed back, despairing over the fact that she was even having to have this conversation. But then, where will the hatchlings stay? Eliza didn't know whether to laugh or scream. She left the chamber some time later, back slightly stiff from sitting on the cold stone for so long. She promised to visit Jormy sometime later that week and set off to find her court, who would no doubt be waiting for explanations. Not that Eliza had much of any. Master of Death. It was a fancy title, one which she had no idea what was actually entailed within it. For all that death had pulled her into their realm, they seemed to have not communicated anything of actual substance, just terrified her and left her with vague, cryptic comments and haunting nightmares. Her sleep today had been anything but dreamless, and Eliza had woken up finding herself longing for the blissful blankness and Tom's warm bed that she'd been granted with last night. Unlike now, where she managed a few fitful hours dreaming of rotten corpses, of death's swallow face and haunting eyes, and enjoy your run. She guessed, judging by her greater connection to Samhain, her necromancy abilities were somewhat amplified. She could probably use the deathly hollows without any real consequence. The resurrection stone warmed slightly on her finger, but beyond that she truly didn't have a clue. I am inevitable, but not for you. She didn't want to think about that particular part of the conversation, not liking how her lungs tightened at the thought. She wasn't like Tom. All she had ever wanted was to live, not to live forever. Ducking into the common room, Eliza easily spotted her court, and they just as easily spotted her. Thea leveled her with a stern look, book abandoned by his armchair, and pointed to her room like a parent scolding a child. Court meeting, your room. Now, Eliza snorted, but obligingly led them all into her room anyway, unlocking the door to let them all through. Ushering them all in, Eliza relocked her door and reinforced the silencing charm out of habit. Her room was covered in wards, probably too excessive for a student room in Hogwarts, but Mad-Eye had one thing right: constant vigilance. Daphne and Draco immediately threw themselves on top of her bed, like usual, and Blaze took a seat on the beanbag she only kept in her room for him. Thea wandered over to the chair by her desk, looking around her room, and Eliza noticed when his eyes lingered on her wall of photographs. Eliza knew exactly which one would have caught his attention. She collected a lot of photos over the years now, and she couldn't deny the pride that filled her whenever she caught sight of them. She had some of herself, and the baby court, as Draco called them, when they were so much younger and smaller. She had individual ones with all her court, her and Daphne grinning at the camera, Blaze picking her up and tossing her, Draco and her on the Quidditch pitch, Malfoy family photos from Yule balls. She had them with Theo, Sirius, and Remus. There was even a few with Barty and the Weasley twins, and a rare grumpy Polaroid of Severus. And there, beside her other few framed ones, was a picture of her and Tom. It was taken by Barty at some point New Year's Day. She had no idea where he had been lurking to capture the frame so perfectly, but Eliza watched it again with Theo as her court settled in her room. She remembered that day. She'd gone round to drag Tom out for a bit only for the idiot to refuse, standing on the doorstep. So Eliza had done the only logical thing. She had scooped up a snowball and thrown it at him. The picture showed Tom scooping up Eliza, trying to throw her in the snow, but Eliza had retaliated by dumping a handful of snow on his head. They were both grinning brightly in the photo, and then it reset, continuing the cycle. Eliza hadn't waited a second upon receiving it to place it with the others. So Draco said, grabbing Snuffles the stuffed dog and raising a pointed eyebrow in Eliza's direction, master of death. Eliza gave a little hum, jumping up so she was sat on her windowsill, the black lake behind her as she drew her legs up. The Hollows gave me a connection to death. They pulled me into their realm and told me I was now the master of death, whatever that means, she said with a little shrug, and Blaze was the first to break the silence. And you just spoke to them, a quick how do you do. Nice to meet you. Eliza snorted, essentially. Just add a bit more mortal terror in there, and you've pretty much got it. And from there, she explained everything she had pulled together, every vague, unhelpful comment laid out before them like some baffling eldritch fairy tale. Daphne let out a long sigh, pushing her hair back as she stared at the ceiling. This is all just so strange. Things are supposed to make more sense as you get older, not get more confusing. If Eliza knew the meaning of peace and quiet, things probably would make more sense. Draco cut in, and Eliza could only nod her head in agreement. And is that all you got up to on Samhain, Eliza? Theo questioned, perceptive as ever, and Eliza gave a little shrug. Meeting with death isn't exactly risk-free. I stayed at Tom's for the night so I could recover. Is that what they're calling it these days? Daphne teased, and Elias smiled victoriously when Theo launched a pen at Daphne's head on her behalf. Oh, Draco exclaimed, sitting up and ignoring Daphne pouting next to him. Eliza, you have to tell us about the Wisengamot session. Father's not looked that happy after one in bloody years. Eliza let out a bright laugh, having almost forgotten about yesterday's events in the wake of Death's brief visit. In fact, there should be another issue of The Insider out soon, with an interview between her and Rita Skeeter in a move of shameless self-promotion on her part. And as she talked with her court, she felt the last shreds of cold that had been clinging to her all day slowly disappear. November, the month where nothing special happened. The lull between Samhain and Yule, where teachers tried to force motivation onto unwilling students and bully them into completing essays before the Yule break hit. Severus had once again started the mock duels in defense, which ended in Eliza dueling the man himself more often than not, or her court trying to face her at the same time. She exploded less and less things in alchemy, and she didn't even have to try any more in ancient runes. She spent half her time with her court, the other split between helping the younger students or spending time with Jormy. The Wizarding Culture Club was still going, quite successfully actually. Last weekend, they had done session on house elves at Hermione's insistence, as well as other household normalities that were nothing but unusual to any muggle-raised student. The club had slowly progressed from theory to practical small spells like household cleaning and repairs that are really only passed down through family. It was amazing how much of normal life was missed off the curriculum. Even Eliza learned some things. She would still make her coffee by hand, even if she did now know the spell. But of course, revolution waited for no man. There was another Wisengamot session soon, and if Eliza and Tom wanted to even have a chance of passing their bills, they had to actually draft them up first. Sadly, they had eventually ran into some disagreements. Stupid, ridiculous disagreements that weren't being settled by their usual back and forth through the notebooks, which led her to here. Severus, Eliza yelled in front of his office, rapping on the door in front of her. Severus, I know you're in there, let me in. Go away, came the quiet groan muffled through the door. Eliza continued to rap on the door harder, and eventually it swung open, revealing a grumpy Severus on the other side. What do you want? He ground out, and Eliza took a moment to narrow her eyes at him, sensing that he was somehow grouchier than usual. I need to use your flu. I'll be back for tea. No, you won't, he sighed, but obliging stood aside anyway. No, she agreed easily. No, I won't, she could be, if she used her time turner again, but it was a weekend, and she disliked using the thing on weekends. If she grew too dependent on it, she struggled over Hogwarts breaks. It was always a strange adjustment going back to 24 hours days, and so tried to limit it whenever she could. And do I get to know just why you need to use my flu? He drawled out as Eliza grabbed a handful of the flu powder. Tom's being an idiot, she answered easily. I'm going to shout at him until he stops being an idiot. Don't die, Severus said, already turning away, thankfully missing the flinch Eliza couldn't stop at his words. Enjoy your run. I won't, Eliza said chippily, and tossed the flu powder down, stepping into the fireplace and stumbling out the other side. She righted herself easily, now well practiced at regaining her balance after using the flu network. Tom wasn't anywhere in sight, but Eliza blinked when she saw Barty sat on the sofa in front of her. What are you doing here? Eliza questioned, moving forward to glance at the papers scattered all around him. Creating a false identity, he answered without missing a beat. Did I grow up in the city or the country? Country, Eliza returned promptly with a small smile, homeschooled. It would explain why no one knows you. Thanks, Barty said, scrawling it down hurriedly as ink blots went flying everywhere in his rush, the Dark Lords in his office. Eliza strode away, flicking her wand out of its holster as she approached the office door and promptly swung it open. To her annoyance, Tom didn't even flinch, simply glancing up at her and kicking out a chair for her to sit on. You're an idiot, Eliza led off with, and Tom had the audacity to roll his eyes. Just because you don't agree, just because you're an idiot, she interrupted with a glare. The whole situation was stupid, really. It shouldn't even be an argument, but Tom had the understanding of a particularly bewildered teaspoon when it came to emotions, so she shouldn't be surprised. The whole issue had began with Muggle-born children. Their aims were to, over the years, stop having magical children left alone and defenseless in the Muggle world, so they grew up in their own culture where they would be accepted and understood. So there would never be another Eliza Potter or Tom Riddle ever again. But Tom, as previously stated, was an idiot. I don't understand what issue you have, he said infuriatingly calmly, and it was Eliza's turn to roll her eyes. Because, Tom, you can't just kidnap children. Well, why not? The fact that she had to spell this out to him, in and of itself, was ridiculous. Okay, I'm going to talk you through this, Eliza said, not even caring to curb her condescending tone. Number one, you would have to find replacement families for all the children you kidnap. Number two, Muggles are going to notice their children going missing, and then it'll be the witch burnings all over again, she explained before shooting him a deadpan glare. And did you really think a bill as ludicrous as this would be passed by the Wisengamot anyway? Tom scoffed. A bit of bribery would get the job done. Bribery, kidnapping. What next? Imprisonment. I am a Dark Lord. You're a retired Dark Lord. Silence. And then Tom let out a long, drawn-out, heavy sigh. And what would you suggest? Not condescending or snappish. Just a genuine question, and Eliza finally let herself relax. Regular monitoring, access to the wizarding world before they're 11, give the parents the opportunity to move into a wizarding village. Pureblood children will still have an advantage, but at least they'll all have the same understanding until we put something else in place. And what do you mean by regular monitoring? He asked, already scrawling out her words in his stupid, elegant handwriting on a stray piece of parchment. Eliza grinned, glad they were finally making progress, and that Tom had stopped being as stubborn as a mule. Maybe we set up a new department in the ministry. Each worker gets assigned children and they check in on the household every month to make sure the parents are coping and that there's no abuse happening. Where would we find the workers? Tom questioned, glancing up at her as he paused in his writing, and Eliza let out a thoughtful hum. Maybe we could bring in the werewolves. Supply them with jobs and make progress on that front. It will be a struggle to get them to agree on that one, Tom pointed out, and Eliza nodded her head in agreement, a small smile on her lips as she raised an eyebrow in his direction. And since when have you turned away from a struggle? Fair play, the hours passed. Eliza never did make it back for tea. December brought with it snow and festive spirit. McGonagall continued the tradition of decorating the castle for Yule, and Eliza still smiled slightly at the sight of all the decorations. The magic of it never wore off, not really. Not that she truly had time to appreciate it between all the essays that had been building up. December also brought deadlines, a lot of them. Herbology was such a useless subject. Eliza huffed as she tried to finish off the essay. Why should she care about plants when she had Blaise to do that for her? It was only her and Theo around in the common room. They had a free hour whilst the other three were in lessons, and they had decided to finish their homework. Eliza had tried to bribe him into doing her history essay for her as well, but it was an unsuccessful attempt. Instead, Theo had chucked a sugar quill at her, so she would stop bouncing her leg as they tried to finish the last of their essays before they left for the holidays. Blaise would be coming back to Grimmauld with her, and they would all meet up at the Malfoy Yule Ball later in the week. She'd heard from a blushing Theo that a certain Elijah Sinclair would be making another appearance, which was partially why Eliza was still doing her herbology essay. She couldn't resist teasing her friend. Nibbling on her sugar quill, Eliza returned to her essay, only to jolt in surprise when she heard Slughorn's voice from the door of the common room. "Eliza," he greeted happily. If Eliza had thought revealing she worked with the Dark Lord would have deterred Slughorn from his overly friendly nepotistic ways, she was sadly mistaken. If anything, he spoke to her now more than ever. "Eliza M. Girl, I'm sure you've heard the news by now that I'm hosting another little soiree. Just a small gathering to celebrate the end of term. You know how it is. Oh, Merlin, please no. You're a hard student to get a hold of," he was saying, rambling on. "Feel like I've walked the whole length of the castle just to invite you, M-girl. You simply have to come now." "Of course, sir." Eliza smiled genially. "I wouldn't miss it." Slughorn let out a happy chortle and began to walk away, completely ignoring Theo's existence. Theo didn't look upset about it. If anything, he looked remarkably pleased. "Oh, and remember to bring a +1, Miss Potter. The more the merrier." The door slid shut behind Slughorn, and Eliza hadn't even opened her mouth before she heard Theo's voice. "No," he deadpanned, not looking up from his arithmancy calculations. "Please," Eliza begged. "No. After all I've done for you, you've given me several heart attacks, and on one notable occasion, a minor concussion," Theo said dryly, and Eliza let out a despairing groan. "Go with Draco. He's going with Blaise," that made Theo's head lift up, face covered in blatant confusion, as he really ran out of girls to go with. "And half the boys," Eliza added. "Needless to say, his reputation has finally caught up with him. It wasn't necessarily a bad reputation. Blaise was sweet and charming to anyone he ever dated. He treated everyone with respect and wasn't like most of the oafs in Hogwarts. But he had a horrible tendency to become bored and move on quickly. That, paired with his unresolved trust issues that definitely didn't exist shut up, meant Blaise never held on to a relationship for long. Hence him attending the party with Draco and leaving Eliza alone and dateless. Heaving a sigh, Eliza dragged Theo's essay away from him, so he had no choice but to look at her. "I'll let you into Potter Manor." Eliza had locked up the manor after raiding the library. The place was too quiet and empty for her, and full of a decadence she wasn't used to, that didn't even exist in their cozy townhouse that was Grimmauld. But for Theo, their resident history nerd, it was practically a dream come true. Eliza had spotted some things in that attic that looked like they were there since the 1300s. Theo looked at her with narrowed eyes, as if he was trying to assess the honesty of her offer. Apparently, deeming her to be truthful, Theo stuck his hand out, and Eliza shook it with a pleased grin. "Okay," Theo agreed. "I'll be your date." That meant her whole court was going to be at Slughorn's party. Oh, this was going to be fun. They walked into the party together, Eliza's heels clicking obnoxiously against the ground as she walked with her arm threaded through Theo's. Blaise and Draco were both dressed in silver, waistcoats with threaded silver running through them, and she and Theo were both in gold. Theo's gold tie matching her silk dress. Daphne and Susan were leading the way in front of them, confidently striding through the door and disappearing onto the dance floor almost immediately. Eliza didn't blame them, anything to escape the impending doom of social niceties that came with Slughorn's presence. Theo tried to slip away with Draco and Blaise, but Eliza held him in place. "We had a deal, not," she said idly, scanning the crowd. "I regret it," he returned. "Why are there so many people?" This is ridiculous. Smiling at his now steady stream of complaints, Eliza deftly grabbed 2 glasses from a passing waiter, pressing one into Theo's hands. I'm sure this will help, she said with a smirk, and they both drained their glasses in one. The liquid burned going down, and Eliza took a moment to blink heavily before she turned to face Theo, who was slightly flushed, ready to take on the crowd. Once again, looping her arm through Theo's, they slipped into the crowd. Eliza chatted and charmed her way through conversations, smiling in the right places and laughing at the right time. She left each conversation after a few minutes, an engaging listener but witty enough to leave a mark, and repeated the process again and again, doing laps of the room. How do you do this? Theo murmured as they hit a lull in the crowd, resting in an alcove slightly out of the way. I've just been nodding along and I'm already exhausted. You don't even like any of these people. No, Eliza agreed readily, now nursing her second drink of the night. I don't like them, but they're useful. And I've had enough practice at the pretense of it all by now. Theo shook his head with a snort. Sometimes, Eliza, you worry me. Only sometimes. She teased, and Theo let out a soft chuckle, bringing her in for a one-armed hug. Now can we take a break and go and make fun of Draco for a bit? Gladly. They tracked Draco down on the other side of the room, stood all on his own, which took both her and Theo aback. When Theo asked where Blaze was, Draco only looked at them glumly. He's arguing with Granger. The Blanc took another sip of his drink. He didn't even notice when I left. Well, that was new. Cheer up, Dre, Theo cheered slightly, and Eliza snickered at Draco's confusion over Theo's new bubbly demeanor. You've got us to keep you company now. What did you do to him, Eliza? Draco questioned, and Eliza raised her hands in defense. I didn't do anything, she protested. Slughorn found us 10 minutes ago and gave us both these drinks, she explained, gesturing to the glass she held that was still vaguely steaming. Theo downed his in one, but Slughorn didn't seem worried, so I guess it's okay. Draco let out a long, drawn-out sigh, slinging Theo's arm over his shoulder to stop the other boy from wandering off somewhere. I hate slug club parties. You hate the fact that you didn't ask Astoria out, Eliza countered, smirking as a bright blush crept up Draco's face. She's 16, he hissed, and Eliza rolled her eyes. And you're only 17. Besides, you could just talk to her as friends like a normal person. Like you'd know anything about normal, he muttered, and Theo let out a snort next to him. Eliza was about to respond and tease him more when she heard someone clear their throat behind her. Spinning on her heels, Eliza turned to greet them before she froze, taking in the sight of just who exactly was stood in front of her. Tom, she asked, staring up at him in confusion. What are you doing here? I was invited, Tom said with a small smirk, hands tucked into the pockets of his suit pants, blazer slung casually over his shoulders. I couldn't exactly turn that down. Okay, Eliza drawled slowly. Why are you here? Maybe I just wanted to dance with you, he responded self-assuredly, but Eliza simply continued to stare at him. Maybe it was the drinks, maybe it was because she was tired of thing long drawn-out game. Maybe it was because it had almost been a year since she had last asked what he wanted, and yet he still hadn't answered. Maybe. And what if I want to dance with someone else? Eliza questioned, tilting her head slightly as she watched him. Watched the darkening of his eyes and the tightening of his jaw before the tension flooded out of him. You can dance with whoever you want, darling. I won't stop you. And so Eliza did. She dragged Theo into the crowd, easily slipping in with the other dancers as they moved about the room. She was twirled from his arms into Daphne, and then back again. She danced with Draco and Blaze and jumped around with her entire court when a Weird Sisters song blared over the old jukebox. She danced with students and strangers alike as the hours continued to pass. The night continued in a similar fashion, even as guests began to leave, as students returned to their dorms or shadowed corners. Old swing music crackled over Slughorn's old beaten jukebox, and it was the same old story every time. She and Tom ended up back at each other's side. In fact, they were so busy talking that they didn't notice the party ending around them until Slughorn himself told them it was time to leave. Tom walked her back to the common room, and if they held on to each other a bit longer than usual, and if the silence seemed heavier, they didn't comment on it. It seemed they were both experts when it came to ignoring their problems. The first thing Sirius tried to do when she came home was ground her. and upon asking why, she discovered that Blaze had snitched on her and had told Sirius and Remus all about the death incident which she had intentionally been keeping out of her letters. "You can't just go summoning death willy-nilly, Eliza," Sirius squawked, more worried than angry, and Eliza listened to his rant with a bored expression on her face. "If we're being technical, it was Death who summoned me, and you can't exactly say no to that." Sirius continued to ramble on to Blaze, who had made the rookie mistake of not sneaking out of the room earlier. Eliza would get him back later, but for now she had to contend with Remus' piercing, knowing gaze. "Master of Death?" he questioned, humming slightly when Eliza nodded her head. "And what does that mean exactly?" "Nothing good." Eliza shrugged and repeated the explanation she gave to her court, and Remus enveloped her in a giant, warm hug. He smelled of tea and biscuits, and his woolen sweater was warm and cozy, and Eliza felt herself slump into his embrace just a bit. She would never call herself affectionate, had gotten used to the touches and hugs of her court over the years, the familial comfort of Sirius and Remus, but it was never a lot, and Eliza was always left a bit tense afterwards. But damn, Remus gave good hugs. She felt herself melt into his hug and buried her head further into his chest when she felt him stroke her hair, all the stress from the last few months fading away completely. "Hey, pup," Sirius called, dropping his arm over Eliza's shoulder to join their little hug. "Creatures set out some lunch in the kitchen if you want some." "There's biscuits," Blaze shouted, already apparently scoffing his face in the kitchen, and Eliza let out a breathy laugh, the safe feeling of being home already seeping into her bones. "That would be nice," she said, and Sirius and Remus led her into the kitchen, where she and Blaze caught them up on all the gossip of the year. It was nice to be back. Eliza resisted the urge to fiddle with her dress as they landed in the Malfoy Manor foyer. The silken, shining gold fabric drifted around her, and if she didn't have utmost faith in the charms keeping it from her heels, Eliza was sure she would have tripped by now. Only Blaze accompanied her tonight. Sadly, it was a full moon, and instead of dragging Sirius to a ball she knew he'd rather die than attend, Eliza had encouraged him to stay behind with Remus and leave her and Blaze to it. It wasn't like she was planning on causing any trouble tonight anyway. She would probably spend half the night with her court and half pandering to the people on the Wisengamot that don't hate her yet. Although Narcissa had mentioned something about having invited a few rune masters, Eliza might have to track them down at some point, and maybe torture Severus if the man decided to make an appearance this year. "Any bets this year?" Eliza asked as she and Blaze stepped into the main ballroom, waving at Narcissa and Lucius on the other side of the room. "Theo and Sinclair get together." "Not happening." Eliza shot down instantly. "Theo's too much of a coward to make a move," Blaze hummed in agreement, joining her in scanning the crowd for their friends. "To be honest, most of our bets are on you and I. Can't tell you what they are, otherwise the results would be rigged." "What if I rigged them in your favor?" "Then you'd be nothing but a disgusting cheat, Potter," Draco said as he appeared beside them. "Now I'm about to steal some champagne and make my rounds as the Malfoy heir. Do you want to join me?" "I'd rather die," Blaze said, glibly ignoring Draco's offended gasp. "I'm going to find Daphne. She knows how to have fun at these things." Eliza scoffed as Blaze disappeared into the crowd. "He says that as if subtly blackmailing government officials isn't the very definition of fun." Draco let out a surprised laugh before looping his arm through hers. "Then there is something you desperately need to know about Lord Burke." Blaze should never have left her and Draco alone together. Alone and unsupervised. Perhaps this Yule ball wouldn't be too quiet after all. She and Draco weaved in and out of the crowd, charming and pandering whoever they happened to meet. Draco made the introductions more often than not, left Eliza to turn the conversation to their favor, and then they left again, finding a different group of people. And if she and Draco had made it their personal mission to spread as many rumors as they could around the different groups, then no one had to know that but them. "Eliza, Draco." She heard someone call for them and smiled when she saw Roll in a small alcove of the room. "How's your last year treating you?" he asked when they got closer, and she and Draco exchanged looks. "Disturbingly peaceful," Eliza answered for both of them, and Roll let out a chuckle. "Being on the Wisengamot isn't enough for you?" he questioned, and Eliza smiled guiltily, knowing for a fact that whatever chaos she caused affected the rest of them in the ministry. It was their fault, really, for getting to know her in the first place. No trolls or dementors or dragons or basilisks or kelpies or murder, Draco continued on for her, and Eliza grinned at the blonde. This has been our most peaceful year yet. I dread to think what will happen to the rest of us when you're all finally let loose onto society. Roll joked, and both she and Draco couldn't help but laugh. It wasn't the first time they had heard that, and she was sure it would be far from the last. I think we all fear that day. Eliza span on her heel, dress flaring out around her with the movement, and suddenly she was faced with Tom, who was already smiling at her with an easy-going grin. "Hello, little star. You look beautiful," he greeted, and Eliza smiled slightly at the compliment. "Thank you," she accepted, and didn't even pause to think when Tom extended his hand, inviting her to dance. They fell into their own familiar rhythm, the years shared between them seen in their easy steps, a flowing, repeating dance between them. "It won't be long now," Tom said, as they began to waltz about the room, "that we can hold an actual Yule celebration. You'd love them all, little star, the bonfires and the parties. If anyone can do it, we can," Eliza said self-assuredly, keeping up with the delicate footwork of the dance. "We can do anything. Take the world," Tom suggested, pulling her in closer, and she found herself smiling up at him. "Conquer death," she continued, and Tom span her, gold dress flaring brightly around her before she was pulled back into his arms. "Stop time itself," he finished, and for a moment Eliza swore it did. How her heart stopped when she met his burning gaze, and everything else fell away as she realized that this boy could be the death of her. And when time began again, she couldn't help but wonder if she would be the death of him as well. Lofty goals for two people still plagued by the nuisance that is Lady Abbot. Eliza joked, as Tom smoothly twisted them around another couple who looked like they'd had one drink too many as they stumbled about the floor. "I still maintain that you can't go wrong with a bit of poison. And I still maintain that you're a bit of sociopath, so here we are. Speaking of where we are," he said, a teasing lilt to his voice that made Eliza instantly wary. "I believe last year you promised me a dance." She couldn't stop the bark of laughter that escaped her. "You were serious about that. You want to tango?" "Only if you can keep up," he challenged, eyes flashing a bright mischievous red for just a second, and she returned his challenging grin. "Draco has been giving me lessons," Eliza said, and sharply adjusted her grip, moving from their usual waltz. "So I think the real question is, can you keep up with me?" They're interrupted by someone clearing their throat behind them. Both she and Tom turned to glare at the woman who had interrupted their fun, and Eliza had to restrain a sigh. The woman was wearing a drab, horrible dress, beady eyes covered by garish glasses, and out of her clutch poked the unmistakable sight of a quick quotes quill. "And what do we have here?" the now recognizable Witch Weekly reporter asked, the prophecy girl and the Dark Lord's son. "If this is coming as a shock to you, then I have to say you're remarkably bad at your job," Eliza drawled. "Tired of playing nice with everyone all night? Tom and I have known each other since I was 11. I suggest you look elsewhere for a story." Instead of backing down, the journalist smiled, and Eliza had to wonder if she was related to Umbridge. They were both very toad-like. "And is that all you have to say?" she questioned, and Eliza resisted the urge to grit her teeth, to pull out her wand and jinx the woman. All night she had been dealing with power-hungry, greedy pigs, and she was just about at her limit for social niceties, especially when it came to those prying into her personal life. "For us to have more to say, you would first have to ask actual questions," Eliza remarked dryly, enjoying the anger that briefly crossed over the other woman's face. "Okay then," the journalist said primly. "Why do you think it's okay to fraternize with the enemy? Don't you think your parents would be disappointed you?" Tom let out a weary sigh beside her, a sentiment she could return. A crowd had gathered around them at this point and just hoped they could deal with the irritating pest before them before she did something drastic. Fraternizing with the enemy. Eliza repeated, letting out a scoff. "What do you think Voldemort has risen from the dead?" "You said his name," the journalist spluttered, and Eliza openly rolled her eyes. Why was Tom just standing there? She was sure he could scare the woman off faster than she could. "Of course I said his name," Eliza said with all the arrogance they accused her of having. "It's a stupid name for a stupid man who is now a relic of the past," she continued, smiling when she felt Tom bristle behind her. He deserved it for not helping her with their current nuisance. "A new era is upon us, and I'm sure my parents would be proud of the work Tom and I are doing." Eliza swept past the woman, pausing before she bumped shoulders with her. Put that in your damn article. Eliza allowed herself to be swallowed by the crowd, rejoining the festivities and loosing Tom in the process. She found Severus surrounded by the other potion masters in attendance and buted into their conversation. And though the man tried to deny it, Eliza knew he was in a brighter mood by the time she left. She rejoined her court for a while, teased Elijah and Theo whenever they were in the vicinity, and disappeared again, catching up with old Slytherin housemates. She found Tom much later. He was stood on one of the balconies, far away from the crowd. The snow was falling thick outside, but he didn't seem to notice the snow falling around him. He merely continued to stare out at the stars, the ones that weren't blocked out by the flurry of snow. Wrinkling her nose at the weather, Eliza stepped out to join him, casting an umbrella charm so she didn't ruin her hair or dress. Some part of her still longed to leap over the edge, shift into her fox form, and run riot through the garden, leaving all responsibility behind. As much as she had grown accustomed to high society over the years, she still considered herself a wild thing at heart. She knew Tom was as well. It wasn't surprising that he had ended up out here. Always a scandal at the Malfoys, Eliza said, referring to the prying journalist from earlier, and Tom gave a rueful smile. Yes, I'm sure it's the Malfoys, and not the fact that trouble sticks to you like a shadow. Ah, but that implies that trouble finds me, and it's not the other way round. Eliza shot back, easily slipping into their familiar camaraderie. Oh, what must it be like? Tom proclaimed dramatically, leaning over the railings, letting the snow catch in his hair to lead a peaceful life. Neither of them could answer that. The truth sat heavy in the space of their silence. So Eliza drawled out teasingly, any birthday plans? Tom shook his head, still refusing to meet her eyes, Wisengam meeting. Oh, the joy, she commented, but the joke fell flat as Tom's avoidance continued. I'll see you there, little star, Tom said eventually, and Eliza heard the dismissal clear as day in his voice. She nodded in acceptance and turned on her heels, leaving him alone on the balcony, still looking towards the stars. What do you want, Tom Riddle? She still hadn't got an answer. Well, now she was done waiting. For the first time in 4 years, Eliza let Tom celebrate his birthday alone. Instead, she went out with her court. They wandered London together, singing and dancing down the snowy streets. The freezing cold bit at their faces as they drank and screamed and yelled at the top of their lungs. They ran riot down the streets, darting through abandoned playgrounds and starting snowball fights as they moved onwards. Leaning heavily on one another, faces flushed and smiles so wide it hurt they watched the fireworks explode above them. Bright, multicolored explosions filling the sky as they cheered, and Eliza couldn't remember the last time she did such unrestrained fun. Together, they welcomed in the new year. And Eliza swore she'd make it count.